Thank you very much, Wade. I'm going to put my tasty beverage down there, somewhere close where I can reach it. Hi, everyone. Oh, everyone stayed. That's great. Thanks to all the babysitters. Next slide. Great. G'day. So my name's Jack. I'm not an academic. I don't have a PhD. I don't have any credentials to talk about the Yarra River, which I'm going to talk about tonight. I spend most of my time hiding out in the RMIT library, which is a very, very nice place, especially during COVID. It's even quieter. But I can assure you I've done a great deal of in-depth research on this talk. I have submerged myself in the subject matter. And because this isn't my strict field of study, it's going to be a little bit loose, it's going to be a bit non-linear, it's going to be a bit weavy, wavy, turny, much like the Yarra River itself. So the Yarra River, this is the lower Yarra River. It may be familiar to most of you. It was a little bit wider and a little bit deeper today. The Yarra River has got about 50 tributaries running into it. It's 242 kilometres long. It starts in the aptly named Yarra Ranges. And where we are here in Brunswick, we're sort of halfway in between the Moonee Ponds Creek and the Merry Creek, which is, probably one of the favourites of a lot of people here. Lovely bike path and walking tours as well along there. But the river is very different from what it used to be. And you can see here that there's some curvy bits up the top and some straight bits down the bottom. It's got some peculiarities, much of which are man-made and quite unfortunate. But Australians are good at mucking things up. Our colonial past means we mess the whole things up. Mount Kosciuszko, our highest peak, is named after a Polish explorer, Kosciuszko, so we couldn't get that right. Warragul is a town in Gippsland. It's named after using a Sydney Indigenous word. So we got that wrong as well. Thankfully, we didn't get everything wrong. The name Yarra comes from Yoroi, which is a Woiwurrung word meaning ever flowing. But more accurately, it's probably called Birrarung from the Birrarung people. We could have had Batman River as our illustrious and controversial founder of Melbourne named it. But he also wanted Batman Street as the main drag, and he also wanted to call the town Batmania. Thankfully, that didn't happen. A lot of things in Melbourne have been renamed since then, which is a great bonus. There's a little park in Northcote, which is no longer called Batman Park, and we've got a pretty dodgy Batman station. Well, it's not dodgy, it's just not much to look at. We've since also renamed an electorate, which is fantastic. So eventually we'll get rid of him, but don't feel sorry for him. He did some really, really nasty things to Indigenous people in Tasmania. And, he's really had his, I suppose, karma. He died of syphilis, his nose fell off, he was incredibly disfigured and died poor. But enough about him. This is a story about the river. Oh, yes, his son drowned in it, but that's also quite unfortunate. So we've got some other peculiarities about the Yarra River. We've got Coot Island over there. I'm told this has got a pointer. Awesome. Yeah, there it is. For those of you that are in the seats that can't quite see that. Coot Island's not quite an island, but it is famous for an industrial explosion in 1992. Some of you who are old enough to remember it might have seen these amazing photos where office workers were kept in town, told to close the windows, all the air conditioning went off, and we haven't really wanted to go back to the office since. Another peculiarity is the Balti Bridge, with my clickers happening. This is a bridge that's named after a former premier. I don't know if there was any great affinity for bridges, but there's two structures on either side which don't actually hold the bridge up. They're just purely ornamental. So, if it's a phallic symbol, then, you can say that, whatever. But you can go down, you can pretty much walk down to it, and it's only ankle deep where these things are, and you can see these massive spires, which hold very little purpose. Now, Nerd Night sold out really, really quickly again, which is great. So this is clearly an audience that likes to jump in. Can I have the house lights on and a raise of hands for anyone who's had a swim in the river? That's about 15%. Well, you'll be pleased to hear that south of Gibbs Street, that's illegal. This is Jim Courier here after winning the Australian Open in 1992. It was 38 degrees in the court and he just had to get cool a lot quicker. Those of you who did raise your hands, you're also in good company with Harry Houdini, who came to Melbourne 90 years earlier. He jumped into the river off Queensbridge, which you can still walk across. He was chained ankles and wrists, and it took 2.5 minutes for him to be fished out of the water. He did swim out, and he said, if I'm not out in 2 minutes, come and get me. But apparently the advice was to an undertaker who says, I'm going to get paid if you don't. Other people that have jumped in the river is the annual Birdman Rally. And there seems to be a running theme of just jumping in and getting out again. And that might be something to do with the colour of the water, or the E. coli, or the effluent, or maybe the affluence in some of the lower parts of the river. I'm going to tell you that the expressions of interest for the Birdman Rally for next year have already closed, so I'm sorry, you'll have to wait for the next year. But it's unfortunate that people just want to get in and get out quickly because it's so dirty. But there are groups within Melbourne who are trying to make it safer and nicer and a better place to be. And part of this is to reinvigorate some of the activities that used to take place on the Yarra River. So there was a race from Princess Bridge from 1913 to 1964 that ran from McRobinson's Bridge to Princess Bridge, which is around about 4.6 kilometres. It ran for quite a significant amount of time until it was clear that the water was so filthy and so dirty, maybe we shouldn't run it. In 1930, there were 600 competitors, which is pretty impressive, and 100,000 people came to watch. And they're the sort of crowds that we get to the MCG on Grand Final Day and the Melbourne Cup. It's no surprise that we have a rich Olympic swimming tradition due to events like this, along with the Portsea Pier pub. It was invigorated in 1987 to 91, but again, the water quality sort of turned it off. In 1914, a 11-year-old boy swam it, and it took just under 2 hours for him. So incredibly impressive for a 5-kilometre swim. The Yarra Swim Company, which is a grassroots group who are trying to reinvigorate this swim, but they're also advocating for a healthier river so we can do more in it rather than just on it. Another community group who are looking to improve the quality of the river so we can spend more time in it is the Yarra River Keeper Association. It sounds a bit like a Tolkien or a George R.R. Martin character, the Yarra River Keeper, but it's more than that. There's also a Bay Keeper and a Werribee River Keeper. Now, part of their mantra, they actually are legitimate organisations, and part of their mantra is to improve biodiversity and raise awareness that this is a river that is a little bit sick. In parts of India, they say that the Ganges is suffering, and the Yarra River is much like that. It didn't used to be brown, it used to be blue, but more on that later. So the Yarra River Keeper is like Nite. It's a worldwide brotherhood of people who work together to improve the quality of the river, along with these other organisations. And they do volunteer events where they jump in canoes and pick up litter. They've also got this really awesome vacuum, which runs along the bed of the river and sucks up things like microplastics. So the microplastics, unfortunately, in the last 5 years have increased in number, and that's pretty unfortunate. Another thing that they've noticed more recently is that since we've gone into COVID and done more focused exercise, there's been a huge spike in popularity in mountain bike riding around the Yarra trails. Now, I think there are a couple of mountain bike riders in the audience, so I'll be really careful what I say here. But what I can suggest is if you ride on a bicycle with more people and less wheels on bike paths, that might be a little bit better, but no pressure, okay. Something else notable about this photograph is the deep slopes on the side of the Yarra where it's been built up. It used to flood a lot, and what we've noticed even today, like anyone who struggled to get here on time, is because Melbourne rains, and when it rains a lot. and it rains a lot in a very short period of time. And where does that water go? Well, the water eventually makes its way through stormwater drains and into the river, but it doesn't move fast enough. So we've got here a couple of significant bends and twists, but if we go back to the upper reaches of the Yarra, where there's all the curly bits and then the straight bits, the original line of where the river used to flow is shown here. So Coode Island, which isn't really an island but was an island for a bit, but then wasn't an island, but is, but wasn't. They keep moving it. You can see the original flow of the river, which, because it took that big curvy bit, it would have taken longer to empty. These areas, laser pointer. These areas up here were always traditionally very low-lying areas and marshy. I think we call it a lot more fashionably wetlands. Also is the Botanical Gardens, where there was a curve in the river. If you go down the Botanical Gardens now, that lake that people get on the gondola on and feed the eels is actually an original bend in the river. And when you pull out your map, you can see that that's all quite logical. The straight parts have really allowed a lot more movement of the water along. Also significant is the Elizabeth Street Creek, which now exists underneath Elizabeth Street. You can't see it, but it's still there. These changes really stopped places like Richmond, which is really, really low-lying land, from flooding all the time. This whole area was a massive floodplain. Much of Melbourne is a floodplain. It's built on mud and dirt. And because it was flooded a lot, it used to come up to here in about 1914, 1917 during great floods, it meant that it wasn't really land that people wanted to live on. So the houses were smaller, they were weatherboard, they were more cheaply built, and this started the north-south divide. So the people who could afford to live on the hill in South Yarra were in a better spot compared to the people who lived in Richmond. Now, because this is a Brunswick crowd, we know that the north's best, isn't it? Yes, good. But thankfully, some of this straightening of the river has allowed that Richmond doesn't flood anymore. And if anyone who came up on the train tonight would have seen the Moonee Ponds Creek absolutely bursting its banks as a result of the huge amounts of rain. The Elizabeth Street Creek is quite interesting because much of the river was full of eels and all sorts of wildlife, which is a bit harder to spot since it's gone brown. But eels still migrate along much of these watercourses. In February this year, some eels were found that have swum all the way up the Elizabeth Creek, which is pretty much a stormwater drain, and spotted in a pond at Melbourne University. Flapping around, all pretty impressive. But thankfully, there's been a huge amount of infrastructural changes at the Elizabeth Street Creek, and events like this don't happen anymore, thank goodness. Those of us who've come home on a late night and there's been a lot of rain, you'll notice that the underpass under Flinders Street Station can get pretty wet, and that's because this watercourse still runs. On really hot days around the Queen Vic Market, you might notice it gets a bit funky, and that's because a lot of the runoff in the meatworks up there ends up in the stormwater drains and then gets smelly and revolting. So straightening the river means that the water moves faster, and there's been more and more information that is informed by floods in Brisbane and New South Wales at the moment, that if you straighten a river, more water flows down and then more floods, and you get dirtier water, and it's a bit of a mistake. But we haven't seemed to be able to manage wetlands and cities together in the same space. This very, very early watercolour isn't a postcard for convicts to steal handkerchiefs and get sent to Australia, but this is a spot around about Queensbridge. So this little structure here is where the Immigration Museum, or the former Customs House, used to exist. And these waterfalls, these rock banks, is where there was a waterfall. If we go forward, 1837 to 1854, when gold was found in Melbourne, Melbourne had a huge influx of migrants from all over the world, China and Europe, mostly Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and what's the other one? Cornwall? Yeah, maybe. England, that's right. And this city grew very, very quickly. You can see this is the spot where the waterfall used to be, and south of here is traditionally saltwater, and north of it is freshwater. So the city grew very, very quickly. There were issues with sanitation. The bluestone laneways, which are now full of cafes and quite nice, were pretty much open sewers. Because Melbourne had grown so quickly, this resulted in Melbourne getting the nickname Smellbourne. It's not so bad anymore. We're quite proud and far much better than Sydney. But it's not all bad news. So there is a lot of life coming back to the river, and some of it's a bit hidden because of the murky waters, including Salvatore. Has anyone seen Salvatore? Yep, Salvatore is a seal who lives out in the bay, and he comes up the Yarra River to Greco-Roman wrestle with carp for his dinner. And if you're on the grams, you can check him out and see him having these sort of love wrestles, all very exciting. Also in the river is the Aguila Australis, pretty funky name, but this is a short-finned eel which is native to these areas. And the indigenous people who lived around Melbourne, the Boomwurrung and the Woiwurrung, had great and extensive eel traps to capture these. Also with their diet is the spiny crayfish. So if we have a return to a healthier river, then these things might exist again. There's already a lot of fishing there, but to catch one of these in the lower river is pretty exciting. Thankfully, this is a conversation that is becoming more and more apparent across Melbourne and across Australia since, I suppose, the apology to Indigenous people. Birrarung Marr is a park which has been developed after reclaiming train track land around the Federation Square area, and there's quite a lot of Indigenous features, a lot of consultations taken place. There's a sort of a terrace garden where water flows and it doesn't flood, and it's a lot more sympathetic to native grasslands, unlike, I suppose, many of the parks like Treasury and Flagstaff Gardens, which are pretty much European-style gardens. In fact, in 2017, the first law was passed in Victorian Parliament that was dual language, which meant that the preamble included a Woiwurrung and Boimurrung statement about a shared ownership of the river, which is a great plus in part of a journey to better understand how this river might be brought back to a more natural state. And to go even further back, the river probably wasn't even a river at one point. It could have been just a creek or a trickle, where the land bridge, where Indigenous Australians who go back from 40, 50, 60,000 years walked to Tasmania. So, like a trickle, I'm trickling to the end of this talk. I've got the 2-minute mark, so I'm right on time. So cheers and thanks.
Thank you, Jack. I feel that I always, after Jack's talk, I always end up seeing a little bit more of Melbourne with fresh eyes. So thank you for that gift, Jack. We'll take a few questions. Right at the back.
Why is the Yarra still so blue? Do we know where it's coming from?
Why is the Yarra still so blue?
Brown? Do you mean brown?
Brown, yeah. I was like, which part is blue? That part of Melbourne I didn't know about. Polluted. Gotcha.
Polluted.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know it's the same Yarra we're talking about now. Yeah.
Melbourne's a massive mud plain. Melbourne's built on mud. Apart from a couple of hills around South Yarra and the Mary Creek Bluestone, it's all really flat-lying land. Or wetland, as it was traditionally. So it would flood a little bit and then not. But because of the expansion of housing, it meant that they had to make this land, I suppose, more solid. And anyone who's lucky enough to own a house at the moment knows you probably have to re-stump your house every 20 years ago because it's built on mud. And all the river is brown because of all the topsoil flowing into it. It's used as a stormwater drain, and the clay is a very soft soil. There isn't a lot of rocks to hold it together, and the vegetation is very much surface level, so it tears up pretty quick, and that's why it's brown all the time. But it didn't used to be.
Muddy land, muddy water. All right. Are we going to allow a follow-up question? All right, we're being nice. All right.
It wasn't just about the colour, but I mean, because
Why is the Yarra making us sick if we choose to swim in it and swallow, I guess?
I've swum in it and I've had a sore throat for a few days, but it's still worth the pleasure. But that's round about...
So it didn't cause enough inflammation?
It didn't cause enough inflammation, which we have learnt is quite a danger. I'm not a water expert. I mean, I know I've just given a talk on this thing, but stormwater drains have got a lot of pits in them, so water sits there and collects, and things get funky and ferment, and things grow in those spaces. So when there is a big, water dump, I suppose, like what you see today, all that stuff flows down the river. And the EPA has warnings about swimming in some of the outlets or the beaches, and they basically say after a big water dump, then don't go swimming in the beaches because it all just comes, down the Yarra in that way. So there's all sorts of weird and funky things. There's also overflow in sewage. If sewage gets really, really, really full, it flows into the stormwater, and then the stormwater flows into the river. So there's the contributing factors, but most of them are pretty unpleasant.
All right. Continue to not drink the water from the Yarra. Up front. How can we make the Yarra River cleaner?
I think the re-establishment of wetlands around Altona is some really, really good management of wetlands that have remained intact for a long period of time. That might have to happen a little bit further up. But because we've got cars and we've got roads and we've got water that moves very, very fast into the Yarra, the built environment doesn't give it a lot of chance. And I think if you've seen a composting toilet or where they put the stuff through the reeds, solutions like that might help. But I'm not a watery person expert, so you'd have to ask the next Nerd Night speaker.
There you go. Well, but sounds like let's keep Melbourne green. In addition, no crop burning. Let's just keep all the plants alive. Okay, we'll take another question. Up the front. Favorite place by the Yarra and why? Let's see if you're north side or south side, Jack.
Oh, look, I'm a big sentimental person, and you might have seen a couple on a bicycle earlier, and they're my grandparents. My grandfather loved cycling along the river, and when he died, we scattered his ashes along the bank, which is really, really special. And I'm going to keep it together, but whatever happens, happens. So there's a cafe called Canteen near in South Yarra. Some of you know it. It's coffee's all right, but whatever. But round there is my favourite spot because you go there and I think of him. So it's more a sentimental thing, and I think that's one of the nice things about a river. It's a shared space. It's a public space, even though you can't spend a lot of time directly in it. It's something we can all enjoy, and they can't ever build stuff on top of it. So that's a great win.
All of the Yarra special is the memories you hold. All right, we'll take one last question. Do you think ecotourism can save the Yarra?
Definitely more people using it, more people on it. I mean, I won't say the company names, but there are two companies that are running relatively cheap boats on the Yarra, and they're electric, which means no outboard motor. They're silent. They're really, really nice. But more people using it will mean that it's understood as a shared space, like the local park or a state park or things like that. So once we sort of claim it, rather than just the booze cruises with the strippers and things like that, it means that there is a collective ownership of it. And grassroots groups like the Yarra Keeper and the Yarra Swim Co, getting involved with those means that we all step up and take responsibility for something that does actually belong to us.
Let's reclaim the river and save the Yarra. Thank you so much, Jack.
For a second, we're going to do quick thank yous, then we'll hand over the